So I've muted everyone now, and if you need to talk, it should only really be about technical issues that, you know, something's gone wrong. That's okay. So I did put a little bit about my inspirations to do this in the email that I sent out. So I think some of my colleagues here, especially the people who are facilitating for the breakout rooms, have probably got fed up with hearing Dr. Helen Morgan's name. Duke's smiling away there. She's my first inspiration when I saw her talk on YouTube about 18 months ago. It was pretty inspiring stuff. And Robin DiAngelo's YouTube video about white fragility is also very inspiring. David Olusoga's incredible work on Black British history has been a great inspiration. Pretty much over the last 8 to 10 years, he's been working on that, and I hope people here have seen some of those. At the moment, Tony, I'm seeing you on the screen. Could you make it into? Thank you. Why can't I see me?
No. I can see you, Neil.
Yes, I've got to pin myself, I think. Hang on. There you go. That's it. It's just my end. Apologies for that. So I think in the context of this session, the people who've inspired me most probably in the last 2 years are the Colston Four. And they're the people who pulled Edward Colston's statue down. I have got a bit of a radical streak in me. There's one person here who's known me at least 15 years. That's Jane Kalmakoff. She'll probably testify to that. She here has probably known me longer than anyone else. So I was quite impressed with them pulling that statue down. But the thing that impressed me most was the interview they gave to a Radio 4 podcast, which only happened 3-4 months ago, around the trial when they expected to go to prison, and the Bristol jurors basically, and the judge decided they shouldn't go to prison. And they were asked, well, why did you do this? And they said, well, we read Arcala's book, Natives, and we also read Rennie Edo-Lodge's book, Why I Have Stopped Talking to White People About Racism. And that is inspiring stuff, because they basically said, well, you can talk a lot and you can read a lot, but you've got to do something, haven't you? So I kind of think that is the pinnacle of what some people could do as an act of allyship, because they risked going to prison and they were prepared to go. And I think that's, who knows what our nation is going to look like once Priti Patel's Nationality and Borders Bill and Dominic Raab's soon to be going through Parliament Human Rights Act reform. Who knows whether those Colston Four are going to not be on their own. Anyway, there's a couple of other inspirations for me. There was the steering group I was involved in the Delivering Race Equality Focused Implementation site, the Labour government's attempt to try and bring race equality for mental health. And there was a great group of about 8 of us from different backgrounds, white, black, South Asian, and we worked together for 2 years to try and bring forth change. And that was a great inspiration for me on how people can work together. And finally, Duke and I are going to this amazing conference in September, which has only just been announced. It's called We Move, and it's the Runnymede Trust who have organised this alongside dozens of different organisations across the country, and they want to do a once-in-a-generation event to work on race equality and migrant rights. And it's going to be really big. Leeds University has been booked, and they're expecting hundreds and hundreds of people at that. So that's an inspiration. So now some personal thoughts. I haven't shared this with anyone before, apart from my wife yesterday. So a bit about me. I feel that if we're going to ask people to talk about allyship and kind of white fragility and that kind of stuff, I just wanted to make sure I was honest enough myself, really. So the first third of my life was actually operated in survival mode in an attempt to survive racial terrorism at school in my local neighbourhood in Warwickshire. This was the 1970s National Front era. And as a person of mixed heritage, I was living in a massively hostile, racist white island. So that first half, a third of my life meant that I'm not patriotic and never will be, because I was made to not feel British. So it's difficult to get blood out of a stone. And in my case, I'm the stone and there's no blood in it, in terms of patriotism. So the second third of my life was spent finding meaning and purpose and trying to find out who I was and healing from all the first third, which I did very effectively in Liverpool for 15 years. And living in that city really helped me to move forward. The final third of my life has so far been spent in a weird vortex where I lost all my hair in 2006. And it was, aside from other strange things that, you know, you don't shave and you don't have to wash your hair and all the rest of it, which are the benefits, the costs of that are actually in authenticity. So there I am with my 2/3 of my life spent looking more like this. That taller bloke with my father next to me, that's what I look like. And in my psyche, that's what I feel like. But I don't look like that anymore. And walking around now, I wouldn't probably get any racist comments because people wouldn't even think I was necessarily from a minority background, part of me. So I'm wondering whether I look the part. And that may sound strange, but in an event that Danielle was in with me in December 2020, someone in the conference said, "Oh, there aren't any presenters from BME backgrounds." And I'd just done a presentation. And I kind of said, well, actually, I am. And it was embarrassing, really, because, so I'm just trying to give you, you know, what it's like. It's a weird one. And I just wanted to share some of that stuff because that's my own kind of take on where things are at for me. And none of that stops me from getting on with this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here doing this, would I? So I don't want to be part of a tokenistic tick box lip service initiative on race equality any longer. I spent 36 years working to achieve what I have done. And I'm tired of systemic racism and a society that's steeped in whiteness as a normality. That's me, okay? Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Adrian to you from the White Allies Network. I'm just about to make him on the screen with me. Hello, Adrian.
Hello.
So I just wanted to start, Adrian, that I seem to remember that I only found out about White Allies Network by, I was on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is something I'm glad I'm on. And this is one of the reasons I'm glad I'm on it, because you posted something in the Black Lives Matter part of it. And there you were. And I thought, wow, I need to, you know, find out what this is all about. And I think that must have been about September last year. I think it was about that. So that's how I found out about you. So I just thought, could you tell us how your network started?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. So it's a real privilege and a joy to be here, to be honest with you, for reasons I'll come on to a bit later. But when I kind of think about my own story of and journey around these issues, I guess it goes right back to Stephen Lawrence, to be honest with you. I was working in a local authority myself at the time in South London. And there was something one of my black colleagues said to me, which kind of just was left ringing in my ears for the last 20, 30 years, actually. She turned to me at one point and said, "Adrian, unless you're part of the solution, you're part of the problem." And I felt that was really harsh at the time, because I thought I was fairly switched on to the issues. I kind of valued diversity, or I would say, black friends, you know, the kind of boxes one tends to tick to be credible around these areas, or at least a lot of white people do. But so that kind of stuck with me. And while I did some work in the area, for many of us, it was George Floyd's death that was a real kind of prompt to making me think more deeply. And I looked around and started to see people. I attended a rally on a Black Lives Matter rally on Tooting Common, not far from me, and about 1,500 people there. 80% were white. I think something is definitely changing. Something is shifting.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm an active member of a local Baptist church here in South London, quite a large one, multicultural. We've got over 50 nationalities present, and I was involved in leading the kind of men's group there, and we had a WhatsApp group going on. And when George Floyd's death happened, the conversation turned quite sharply in that group, and the assistant pastor, who's a black guy himself, and I felt we need to actually create more of a forum to talk about these issues, because believe it or not, despite being a multicultural church with many nationalities, we just never talked about race. So we set up some Zoom sessions and decided to do some listening assemblies, in which we would take it in turns for the black guys in the group to kind of just share their reflections on George Floyd's death and what's that evoked in them. And that's just for the white guys to sit back and just listen without interrupting, and then share some of their reflections at the end of that evening. And then the next evening we reversed that with white guys talking and our black brothers just listening in and then commenting at the end. Something quite profound happened to me during those sessions, because I thought my black friends would be encouraged by the kind of seeming mobilization of so many white people in ways which I hadn't really seen before. But one by one, they just described their weariness and their feeling that, oh yeah, well, this will be a flavor of a month for a short time, but nothing will really change. And that kind of cut me to the heart. These are my friends. Number one, they never really talked about their experience of racism with me before. We never had those kind of awkward conversations. And number two, that they should be so wearied when I kind of felt encouraged by what was going on. And I thought they need to see more action from me, people like me with my color skin, and not just for a moment, but something which is actually much more longer lasting and a commitment. So that's a long story behind the reason on the anniversary of George Floyd's death, and I run these occasional webinars as part of my leadership development work. I did one on the anniversary of George Floyd's death, had a really good panel come to speak, and that's when I launched the White Allies Network.
Right, thank you, Adrian. So I'm just wondering, did you find any problems or difficulties in the early stages of formulating the group? You know, any particular things that you had to encounter?
Well, first of all, the name was a challenge. But every part of that name, White Allies Network, you know, I had to think quite carefully. I consulted quite widely around it. Number one, just white, sticking out there, white. You know, is that sounds exclusive? Is this a white supremacy group? You know, is this a bunch of white saviors getting on the bandwagon and you know, riding on their white horses to the rescue, kind of thing? And it was interesting, as I talked with both white friends and also black friends, the people that had more problems with it were the white friends than the black friends.
Interesting.
Because my black friends said, you really need to own your whiteness,
right,
to actually name it as White Allies, doing the work, as you know, Edo Lodge talks about, and in fact Layla Saad does as well, doesn't she? Doing the work was really important. So I decided to stick with white. As a number of you be aware, the word ally has also been under a lot of scrutiny. And some have kind of asked, well, who gives you the right to say that you're an ally? That's for someone who suffers from racism that would need to decide that. I decided to stay with that, but have a caveat in our strapline, which is aspiring to be effective allies against racism. Trying to take a humble route, but also taking the advice of a number of people I consulted, to set up a council of reference made of people of color that would be scrutinizing what we did, make sure we didn't get into some kind of white saviorism mentality, and really just keep us true to ourselves, really, and also true to action, because we didn't want it to be just a talking shop. We want it to be something that mobilized us and others to taking action. There's also something about not relying on people of color always to educate us, saying, actually, no, we're taking responsibility here to educate ourselves rather than relying too much on others. So the name was a challenge. We also, partly because at the church that I'm involved in, we held separate white listening assemblies and those for black members of the congregation to be able to talk on their own. And they were quite powerful, because I facilitated the white group, and they talked about things when they were in a white-only group that they probably wouldn't talk about, in terms of some of their prejudices, being honest about some of their own stuff. I don't think they would if our black friends were there. So I thought we would have that as part of the White Allies Network, that sometimes we would have everyone's welcome sessions, but other times white-only sessions. But the more I thought about that, and the more with the steering group I thought about that, the more exclusive that started to feel, and we just weren't comfortable with it in the end. And so all our meetings now are open to everyone, and we have two kinds of membership. One is aspiring white ally, and the other is what we call co-mentors, for people of color that want to join us, that want to support us in our journey. But we are taking responsibility for our own stuff here, and anyone that joins us who's a person of color, we're very grateful for their presence.
I guess I'm one of those, Adrian.
Yeah, indeed.
I am, yeah.
Yeah. So that there were some of the challenges. It was the name, it was the kind of, do we have white only or other sessions like that? Those are some of the key challenges I think that we faced.
So I've attended, I think, 3 sessions now. I know the focus has been on the learning through YouTube videos, mainly. One was an interview, was Satnam Singera being interviewed by Krishnan Gurumurthy from Channel 4 News. Much in the sort of way that we're trying to do this, only theirs was more of a conversation, I think. But and yes, there was one on the Chinese Opium Wars, which certainly really opened up my mind to how awful things had been without me realizing it. And then there was the other one more recently about the partitioning of Africa and carve up, as I called it, by the Western European powers in 1890, about that time. So that's kind of the formulating way that the network chooses to try and do their learning, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, we started off with an inaugural meeting, which we just had on open book, saying, okay, for those that are interested in like me, wanting to kind of really do something active and keep that commitment going as an aspiring white ally, what do we want to cover? What do we want to cover? Having said that, I did want to put a frame of reference around it, saying it is towards action. It's not just a talking shop that I want to set up. So make sure you want to be a part of action to be taken. But what a lot of people said right at the beginning is that they just felt there were so many gaps in their histories as white people, just wasn't covered in their education, and so we really need to educate ourselves. So that's why the focus has been very much on that in the initial sessions.
Yes.
It's starting to gear much more towards action in the next few months. On Windrush Day, we have, actually, I'm delighted to say, we have the lawyer, Jackie McKenzie, who represents Windrush victims. She's agreed to do an interview with me.
Right.
And that will be giving us an update on the situation, and also how we can get involved in finding justice and seeking justice for the Windrush victims, which is, for me, is one of the most shameful episodes of my lifetime, or in recent years, the way we've treated them. And then in September, we have a session geared specifically towards how do we actively campaign, and we've got a couple of colleagues that are helping who've been working at political levels to help us to think about how we can influence things at a policy level. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Adrian. So I suppose, what would you describe as the best thing that's happened in this journey for the network? Have you got a sort of standout moment that you feel kind kind of really encapsulates the fact that you're doing it and it was worthwhile doing?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that happen, really. I think at the end of each session, people have just said they've learned so much. And, you know, most people have a degree of commitment to it before they started, but there was a sense of filling in the gaps that we were all doing together. And it was so good to see what people were saying at the end about, wow, I just was not aware about that. And also after on one of our early sessions, somebody who's written a few books and also blogs regularly wrote about her experience and reflections on the session. And I was just delighted at that, because however many you have in a network, sometimes you just need to touch one person who's the hub of another network. And then the kind of message can spread out, and you can actually have an influence much wider than the network that you're involved in. So I kind of saw that happening with her as a blogger. But also, to be honest with you, Neil, the fact that you're starting this, and that maybe there was a degree of inspiration from what we've been doing on White Allies Network.
There was.
That has prompted you to kind of take this initiative. And so that, again, just gladdens my heart, because it means, you know, we have other hubs and other networks that can spread out from here.
That's certainly my intention, to try and spread the word through as far as I can go with people who want to travel with me on doing it. Yeah. So that's great. I suppose the next thing I was going to move on to was what can have been some of the potential pitfalls around discussing such a sensitive issue, because for white British people to kind of have to face some of the awful things that the governments of their nation over the centuries have done, and the knock-on effect of it now, I think that's more important to say. You know, we know what the Romans had done in all sorts of places. Their legacy you can see all around in terms of the wonderful systems they set up, and some of them are still there underneath various buildings. But I just wondered, if there's anything around, because I know that you've got a code of guidance, haven't you, to try and help people discuss stuff which is a bit sensitive.
Yeah, we set up, and these actually came out of the inaugural meeting. We put this together as a whole group. 10 guidelines, really, 10 values that we want to maintain within the spaces that we create. And those, I won't go through each of those now, but they're available in the network. But other things that I think that came to me is that I was on a webinar where somebody called Krish Kandiar, I don't know if anyone's come across him, was holding a webinar in terms of his influence in government levels on policy. And somebody who was British-born Chinese was on the call and said, you know, what about us? There'd been such a focus on those from African Caribbean heritage that, you know, she felt so left out. And also the amount of racism she was getting, being blamed for COVID and everything else, just walking on the streets of London. And so that really opened my eyes, and we actually co-opted her. She's now part of our Council of Reference. And that's why we have broadened out. So we're covering Asian orientated things as well as more African and Caribbean heritage issues. I think as a white person, I think there is something about just recognizing your own internal reaction and white fragility, we might call it, and defensiveness, because even in recent months in our WhatsApp group, again in our church, a number of our Black brothers were kind of really just slating our response to Ukraine in terms of welcoming refugees.
Oh yes.
And my initial thought was, oh, come on, you know, they are in need, etc. And as convener of the group, I just gently kind of challenged some of the attitudes there, and got challenged back too. And as I reflected on it more, I thought, because some of the language they were using was fairly fruity for particularly for a church context. I thought, come on, let's just temper it down a bit. But then I thought, I need to much more look at the feeling beneath the words. That's right. And the pain beneath the words rather than the words that are being said.
That's right.
And I had to apologize to the group, saying, listen, I came down too hard on that, and I do apologize. I'm starting to see things through your eyes in terms of the contrast of how we have treated white immigrants from Ukraine, and also the treatment of people with color at the Ukrainian
At the time.
border. Yeah.
I mean, my wife's Polish, Adrian, and I've been there 30 times. I was there. I left 10 days before Vladimir drove the tanks in. That's how recent I've been there. And I know what those guys meant. So the Polish government were starting to build a wall to stop Afghans, Syrians and Africans coming into their country because they didn't want those refugees. And they'd already passed the budget to get the money to start building it. Sort of equivalent to Donald Trump's wall to stop Mexicans, pretty similar. That's where they got the idea from. And good old Viktor Orban in Hungary, who they love.
Hello, everyone.
Similar stuff.
Yeah.
So the ink wasn't even dry on the budget flowing to build that wall. And then, you know, a couple of months later, 2 million Ukrainians go over the border